You're listening to There Ought to Be a Law, the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by me, Anthony Simino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has worked to make cars safer. All right. So, welcome everybody. Today we have a special guest. We have Dr. Jeffrey Wishart, who is an expert in automated vehicles. I recently wrote a book called Fundamentals of Connected and Automated Vehicles for SAE International. He is at the Arizona Commerce Authority and the Science Foundation of Arizona. That is a very short description of your background. Is that accurate?
It is. Thank you, Anthony. You got the name right. Most people don't get it right on the first go, so impressive.
Some of this stuff is things that, auto manufacturers have been really trying to develop for, 70 years even. We've seen some efforts by the industry to do so. And, when you look at that, how long we've been trying to do it, and then you have, the DARPA challenge and some of those other things mingled in, and yet we're still seeming to really trying to get our hands around it. It kind of, it sheds some light on, why many people have been skeptical of the continued pronouncements from some of the industry players that, it's going to be here next year. It's going to be here in 5 years. You can't really say that.
Well, when I started graduate school, people were talking about fusion energy as the energy of the future. And now it seems that people are saying that fusion energy is the energy of the future, and it always will be. And, it seems to be a scenario that also is applying to the safe self-driving vehicles.
There are a few like that. I mean, people talk about hydrogen in the same way. I've got differing thoughts on all of that. But I think that around 2015, 2016, we really started to, on the Gartner hype cycle, get to that peak of excitement. And I think we might be in the trough of disillusionment at this point. We've had a lot of bankruptcies in the industry. We've had a lot of claims or predictions that haven't come true. By 2020, a lot of people thought this was all going to be very common on public roads. Clearly not the case. So I think that there are some things that need to be changed in order to get us to where we see these vehicles kind of all over the place in all sorts of different use cases. But I think that their progress is being made, but certainly not at the pace that we thought just a few short years ago.
Yeah, so going through your book, you kind of cover the history of autonomous vehicles and different approaches people have taken, and you've talked about some things in there that we've mentioned a lot on the show that I think, hey, this is a great idea. Things like V2X, and there was something specifically that I just mentioned before you joined us. We were talking. And it wasn't adaptive cruise control. It was
cooperative cruise control.
Cooperative cruise control, which to me just sounds amazing, because I always use kind of adaptive cruise control, and I get mad when the people behind me don't.
Yeah, connectivity is the missing piece, I think, with automation. We really need connectivity to make automation work well. I think that if we could be talking to each other in our cars, to the pedestrians and cyclists on the road, to the infrastructure, there are all sorts of advantages that would come with that. The problem is, I think you guys have talked about this on your show, the FCC decided a few years ago to cut half the spectrum. But it was really, a lot of people were not happy with that decision, but it was a use it or lose it situation, and people weren't using it. And so for 20 years, we've been talking about cars that talk to each other and the infrastructure, and very little was done beyond pilot projects. There are lots of pilot projects all over the place. There's still pilot projects all over the place, but we don't have any real deployment when it comes to the OEMs. And so the FCC said, well, we need this spectrum for our Wi-Fi. So we're going to allocate it there. But yeah, as you say, Anthony, there's lots of advantages when it comes to connectivity. If we could, if we were speaking to each other on the highway and we had cooperative adaptive cruise control, studies have shown that you could reduce your energy consumption, you could improve throughput, safety would be enhanced, all sorts of advantages. But the challenges when it comes to connectivity, the cybersecurity challenges, the trusting of data that the OEMs themselves didn't produce. I think that so far we just, for whatever reason, for all those reasons, I guess, we just don't have that on our roads.
But I feel like we have some connectivity in terms of, like, if you use Google Maps or something like that, it says, hey, I'm going to reroute you this way. Or, hey, there's an obstruction up ahead. There's never an obstruction. It's always a lie. Never find this obstruction. They've gotten really good with, there's a speed trap up ahead. But so we're kind of having that connectivity happen right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on how you define connectivity, right? If you're defining connectivity by vehicle to X, DSRC type technology or CV to X, we don't have that yet, but we certainly have been people have been using the car as a hotspot for some time now. So yes, as you say, we all get some sort of information into our cars at this point. Most cars are connected, but not connected in the way that I was saying that would really help us when it comes to throughput, energy efficiency, and safety.
Well, do you think that's going to happen? Is that where basically someone like Google or Apple is essentially, they have enough of these devices and enough cars on the road where they essentially become the de facto standard?
I think the industry seems to be moving towards CV to X, so using the cellular network. So rather than having what's called roadside units periodically around the country everywhere, I think that's just too expensive. They're around 50,000 per unit, and so you think trying to put one of those every few miles or at every intersection, it's just not going to happen, I don't think, right? Unless it comes down quite a bit in cost. But so now using the cellular network to make it happen, I mean, we have latency issues, we have cybersecurity issues that need to be addressed. But I think that's probably more promising. And certain countries like China is really big on cellular V2X. So I think that's where the industry seems to be heading. And there's some USDOT grants out at the moment. It's called the V2X Accelerator. And my research group is looking at this. This is looking, they do want some RSU components, but they also are interested in these futuristic or more future forward thinking cellular applications.
Well, Jeff, one of the objections we've had to the CV2X is that in comparison with DSRC, it's hard to anonymize the information that's going across because, of course, it's IP based. I've read recently about some technology that would use C2VX or cellular technology, which is anonymized. And can you give me any enlightenment on that? Do you know anything about that?
I'm sorry, before you jump into that, can you just define a couple of those? We're using a lot of high-level acronyms, and I know the two of you are like, let's jump in. Okay, so V2X we've talked about is vehicle to infrastructure, and then you had a bunch of acronyms in there, and I died.
All right. Well, okay. IP address is the numerical code that identifies whatever device you're using to connect to the internet.
Got it.
And DSRC was the protocol that was being developed by the government for communication between vehicles and each other and the rest of the world, the rest of the universe, which was called V2X. And that had the characteristics that it was completely anonymous. So it did not have an IP address associated with it. Now, the potential problem is that if you have all the cars connected through cellular technology is always associated with the IP address of your vehicle or your phone or whatever. And this is how people hack into other people's phones using technology that's being promulgated by bad actors around the world. So the question is really, if you're using cellular technology to connect vehicles, doesn't that leave you open to manipulation by people who can hack into your particular phone or vehicle or whatever it is connected to the cellular network? Now, what I've read recently is that there is some discussion of using those frequencies and that technology, but not using the IP address or somehow anonymizing or making anonymous the participants in the cellular technology. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
I think, I mean, Fred, I am not a cybersecurity expert by any means, and I think that it's a absolutely crucial aspect of things that are kind of flies under the radar a little bit. There's a big need for more cybersecurity experts in the automotive industry. I was at an event recently where they said not just automotive industry related, but there were 15,000 open positions in Arizona when it related to cybersecurity. So I think that's a big missing piece of this. And the cellular providers are working on this, as you say. I mean, we have some cellular partners in Arizona with our research group, and that's something that they talk about. That they need to understand what those issues are, and anonymizing is one of those techniques. I think that they would be looking at to ensure that we aren't. If you can't trust the messages coming into your vehicle, you can't make use of them. And that's, I think, been one of the major reasons, as I said before, why the OEMs have not been open to the connectivity side of things. They say, well, look, we're just going to do things ourselves. We're going to perceive everything that we need to perceive, and anything that comes to us. So they might be open to certain things like single phase and timing messages or SPAT messages, getting some information like that. But anything that's safety critical, I haven't seen much openness to it. But as you say, if we can make the messages robust, I think that's something that would help convince them. And so one of the things I'd like to do, and I'm trying to develop a research project around this, is a trust building V2X project where we provide the perception at a location to the automated vehicles, and they compare it against the perception that they've done on board the vehicle. And if those things match, that's a way of building the trust. So they can trust both the accuracy and the security of that message.
I want to get back to the book that you've recently published. And for our listeners, the title of the book is Fundamentals of Connected and Automated Vehicles by our guest and a lot of other distinguished people. Jeff, let me ask you, who is the target audience for this book?
So that actually stems from a course on connected and automated vehicles that I teach at Arizona State University. Each chapter is kind of a lecture that I had. So I had all these lecture notes, and I thought, well, why not write a book about it? And then I quickly realized that it's a lot of work to write a book. And so I brought in some co-authors. And so the audience is, the first audience was my students, but now the audience is I tried to write it for maybe to reach both the lay audience who's interested in this topic, but also the engineers who want a quick way of understanding the basics, the fundamentals of the technology. So each of the chapters talk about a different aspect of the technology, and each chapter could be a book in and of itself. But it's getting you a intro fundamentals understanding of those concepts.
Well, I did think it was a great survey of the fundamental concepts, but being an engineer, as we do, the first thing we do is stick a screwdriver into something and twist it to see if we can break it, right? So I have a couple of detailed questions, if I can go ahead and throw them at you. So I'm looking at page 189, and it says, in the case of ADS, which is automatic driving systems, there are no regulations or standards currently, close paren, that dictate how an ADS development and or subsequent V&V process, V&V means verification and validation, must be conducted, which type or amount of testing must be conducted, and what level of performance is required for the ADS. Now, to me, that gets to the heart of the problem that we have with self-driving vehicles or AVs. So where does the industry get its requirements for safety and reliability? And those are key parameters that should be included in everybody's design for a self-driving vehicle, yet there seems to be an awful lot of opacity around that. We just can't see what people are doing, and the government hasn't stepped up to that. So what are your thoughts on that, Jeff?
Yeah, that's great, Fred. You pinpointed exactly the problem. Right now, if you're developing an automated vehicle, you have to pass FMVSS, so Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, just like any other car that's on the road. If you get into a collision, you have to report that to NHTSA under their standing general order. But that's basically it. Then it goes state by state. Each state will have different regulations when it comes to deployment on the public roads. But as you said there's no real process that's required of any of these vehicles. Some of there's standards out there, and there are lots of them. I was at a conference recently where someone showed just ISO standards, and it was like 100 of them. And so there are lots of standards for which to choose, but there's no real guidance on, oh, you have to do this one, you could ignore this one. NHTSA in 2020 had their advance notice of proposed rulemaking, where they started to recommend three pretty major standards in UL 4600, ISO 26262, and ISO 21448, but it didn't get past the ANPRM stage. So yeah, everyone's doing their own thing. Everyone is saying basically you have to trust us. And so, there's a lot of criticism, I think, fairly against some of these companies who say trust us, and they don't want to give us any data to back up their claims. But I guess in their defense, and I'll do that for shortly, is that there isn't that process for them to go through. There's nothing for them. There's no benchmark for them to compare against. And so that's absolutely what's needed. I think we all wish that NHTSA would step in and develop some of these regulations that are required, a way for us to have confidence that these vehicles are safe to be on public roads. But NHTSA hasn't done that. NTSB has been banging their drum for several years to get NHTSA to do it, and it hasn't happened yet. But NHTSA is just not the FAA. The aviation industry had some bad years where there were a lot of accidents, a lot of people died, but they have cleaned up their act, and they really do have a pretty good safety record, the 737 MAX notwithstanding. And I think that's a lot of us in the automotive industry kind of look over at that industry, the aviation industry, and say, oh, I wish we could get there. But NHTSA is just not the FAA. People's relationship to their cars is just not the same thing that people have relationship with airplanes. So I just think that it's needed, but it's going to be slow, and it's not going to happen at the pace that we all want.
Well, we actually tried to fill some of that gap with our consumer-oriented AV Bill of Rights, and I know you've read those. What was your reaction to those?
Yeah, I thought they were great. I think that it was a while back. You and I had that interaction, Fred. I can't remember them specifically anymore, but I remember thinking, yeah, absolutely, this is something that is could be adopted in some form by NHTSA. And I'm glad that you guys did that. My research group is doing similar. I mentioned that there's no benchmark against which to compare these vehicles. My research group is trying to develop that benchmark so that we can, if society and through the regulator establishes what that benchmark is, my process will allow for that to happen. We aren't going to say it has to be this much X safer than a human driver, but if NHTSA makes that call, then our process would be usable for that purpose. And so my plan is to develop the research, toss it over the fence to myself as the V&V task force chair under SA's on-road automated driving committee. And then hopefully that influences the regulatory body. So, like you, I think that we'd like to see some of these regulations and trying to help NHTSA get there. Right? I think if we're just passive and wait for it to happen, it's not going to happen as quickly as if we all work together and put things out there into the public domain and say, here's something that you could use.
Is the industry
Go ahead, Anthony.
I was going to ask, so is the industry really just trying to jumping ahead of itself? So they're jumping right into level 4 and level 5 driving. We've seen with, GM Cruise, not ever sure what happened to them. Well, they're trying to get to that level, which is full autonomy, no steering wheel, no pedals and whatnot. Whereas systems in level 2, which is what I think a lot of cars have, is like lane keeping assist and automatic emergency braking. That stuff doesn't work yet. There's no regulations around that. I mean, it works, but there's no standards, and sometimes it doesn't work, like on my vehicle. But I mean, shouldn't they get all of that working first before saying, hey, let's fly? Like, let's crawl first.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think each of the levels have serious challenges with them. So for level 2, for example, as you mentioned, we've got the level 2 is very interesting because it can range from just lane centering and adaptive cruise control all the way up to this car can do everything. I just need to always be supervising it, right? So what's called the object and event detection and response, OEDR, can vary in sophistication quite widely. But regardless of how sophisticated it is, the driver is always responsible for the actions of the vehicle. And so the driver always has to be supervising that system. And we know that humans are not great at supervising automation. So the HMI challenges are quite substantial when it comes to level 2. And I don't know, I haven't seen anything that proves that a driver monitoring system can make sure that the driver is constantly engaged in the task and ready to, at a moment's notice, intervene. So
let me just decode one acronym. He referred to HMI, which is the human machine interface.
Thank you, Fred. Yeah, I do speak in acronyms. I make that mistake all the time.
I share that affliction.
Okay. Yeah, that was adorable watching Fred do that. That was so much fun for me.
And then we get to level 3, where the human's no longer actively supervising, but you have to be able to take over if the vehicle runs into trouble for whatever reason. And so then can you be sleeping? Can you be reading? Can you be you're completely disengaged from the dynamic driving task, as it's called, but you have to, within a certain time frame, be able to take over. So if the vehicle knows it's in trouble or asks you to intervene, what does that time frame look like? Who's liable in the transition from you've been notified as the fallback driver, and now you're about to take over. Where's the liability lie? And is it safe? Can that be done safely? Where you were completely disengaged from the dynamic driving task, and now you're trying to engage and try and get situational awareness such that you can be moving at 65, 70 miles an hour on the road, yet you have to be able to know what's happening around you pretty quickly. That's very challenging. So another HMI issue there. And then as you were talking about level 4, we've got these vehicles that are, okay, so the human driver can be completely out of the loop. But can these vehicles figure out situations for which they haven't been trained? AI doesn't extrapolate very well. So what if it hasn't seen it in training? What does it do? And the idea, you want it to not cause an issue, even if it hasn't seen that situation or scenario in training. But that's challenging. AI is I think there are going to be some advances in AI, but we're not there yet. And so, I guess at the very least, you'd want the vehicle to pull over into, I don't know if this is one of Fred's favorites, the minimal risk condition. But what does that look like? And can they perform that safely is still a question too. So, I think that without to get back to Fred's point, without that process and the regulation, it's hard for us to know what the safety impacts of these vehicles are. I mean, I think that there's some white papers that have come out from some of the automated vehicle companies, but it doesn't really show enough for someone like me or the general public to say, yeah, I think that's sufficient, that they've shown that they're safe enough to be on public roads. There's nothing that we can't have any confidence, I think, in those claims yet. And I think that's a situation that's not ideal for anybody.
Let me just jump in. The level 3 for our listeners is a self-driving car that is designed for a human to take over in an emergency, whereas the level 4 car is a self-driving car, which is designed such that a human does not have to take over in an emergency. The car will take care of itself. So that's the key distinction between level 3 and level 4. And Jeffrey mentioned a key word, which is liability, which I saw Michael perk up over there. So, Michael, you want to talk about the liability consequences of these levels?
Well, I mean, I may have been perking up over level 3 and thinking about, we see crashes all the time where they're almost instantaneous. Even human drivers aren't able to respond to them. And in a level 3 vehicle, I think those, we looked at the one, I believe, a few months ago where the truck cuts off some kind of boxy Kia, and there's literally no time for the driver to react, and the Kia flies in the air, rolls. Luckily, they weren't injured, I don't believe, but it was a kind of a stark reminder that these things happen in milliseconds. And I don't foresee that there could ever be a way to design a system that's going to allow a human driver to take over fast enough to avoid those. But at the same time, even if, humans can't really avoid those crashes now anyway, but there has to be some, within that period of seconds, there has to be some way to avoid these crashes that are going to happen fast, and that we are pretty sure humans aren't going to be able to disengage from a movie or a cat nap in order to address them in time. So it suggests that, level 3 is never going to be perfect at predicting and warning drivers and avoiding those types of collisions.
And level 3 is really challenging because the AV developer, I guess the OEM has to be very explicit about what you can be doing, what you can't be doing. If you are not engaged in the dynamic driving task, you're liable to potentially fall asleep, right? But is that allowed? Can you be eating? Can you have something in your lap? Can you be looking behind you? I mean, so there is one automaker that's supposed to be coming out with a level 3 system in the US, and they have not been explicit about either what the driver can do or the liability in that transition period, or what that transition period even looks like. So yeah, I for a while I thought, no, there's no way anyone's going to build a level 3 vehicle, but I may be proven wrong shortly. So I think that it's level 3 is, to me, potentially the most challenging of the levels.
Yeah, it was surprising. I think we're seeing was Mercedes has a license to try out level 3 in Nevada, going slower than 35 miles per hour. And we talked about liability because Mercedes made this kind of blanket claim saying, hey, we'll cover all of your liability if something happens. And then Michael, the lawyer, is like, that's never going to happen. There's no way.
The press arm is different perhaps than what the engineers were thinking, right? So that's always a challenge in a big company.
But it almost sounded like what you're talking about, that level 2 is really hard as well. That level 4 might be potentially easier. Whereas I think is like, there's a lot of stuff missing from level 4. Why not just, put all these level 2 systems in there? Don't make claims that they'll drive your car like some company does and that they do everything for you. Instead, every time there's human interaction and overriding of the system, hey, the system, you can just learn that's new data points that you can then feed into your level 4 system. Like, why did this person hit the brake here?
I actually think that, I think that's certainly potentially true. I think that even better might be, so we've got what's called active safety features. So you mentioned a couple of them, Matthew, but those are actually, so if they're intermittent, that's considered active safety. So the lane keep assist is intermittent. Just if you start to drift and you hit the lane marker, it'll send you back towards the center. So lane centering is sustained operation. So that's automation. But these active safety features like automatic emergency braking, forward collision warning, blind spot warning, these things that are monitoring the human driver, those have proven safety impacts. So there was a study a few years ago that showed that forward collision warning and automatic emergency braking reduced front to rear collisions by 50%. And so a lot of these active safety features, we've seen that the rear cameras have proven reductions in collisions, things as you're reversing your vehicle. Some of these technologies we know are safe. Now, the Euro or the US DOT has what's called the New Car Assessment Program, NCAP, and they test a few of these active safety features, and they're thinking of adding some more. I think that's I think that they're getting a little bit more attention recently because of that trough of disillusionment potential for automated vehicles. And I think that that's definitely a promising way to go, that humans are going to be in the driving loop. And yet we're going to have these automation systems that will act as guardrails and prevent us from potentially doing some dumb things.
Well, there's an interesting aspect to this in my mind, which is that no car that I've ever seen informs the user as to what the margins are for safe performance. Now, every car has got probably a safe operating envelope. So what does that mean? Well, at 3 miles an hour, you can turn the car as hard to the left as you want. Nothing bad's going to happen, right? At 100 miles an hour, you have to be very careful about how much you turn the car to the left because with only a few degrees of steering to the left, your car is going to go out of control. So this is what I mean by the performance envelope. One of the potential advantages of level 4 automation is that the car presumably would know what its performance envelope is, and it would presumably stay within that safe performance envelope more consistently than would a human driver. Because the human driver in your car, in my car, have no idea what the performance envelope is, right? I'm going to stop in the accelerator. We don't get any warning that says, hey, you idiot, you're going 85 miles an hour on a country road. What the hell are you doing?
Put my wife in your passenger seat. You'll get it. Don't worry.
Oh, thank you. Is she generally available? Or?
Different conversation now.
But but lane keep assist is interesting because I find that I actually hate it because when I use it, it tends to fail on curves that I wouldn't anticipate it would fail on. And yet there I am hurtling towards the guardrails at 40, 50 miles an hour. I generally turn it off. The only time I turn it on really is when I'm on an interstate highway and I just don't expect anything bad to happen. And of course, then what the hell is the point? Because, you're on a highway where you don't expect anything bad to happen, right? Easy driving.
Yeah, a few points there. Fred. First, I think it's really important that as the cars get more and more complicated, we need more and more education for drivers. But you know what it's like at a dealership. You're not going there and getting a full course on what the vehicle can do and what these limitations are. And that's a real problem. No one's reading the manuals. And yet these features are getting more capable, but more complicated. But then your second point about shutting off the feature. The features, depending on the manufacturer, it's going to vary between manufacturer each. So automatic emergency braking, as I said, has proven safety benefits, but not all automatic emergency braking's features are designed the same and have the same efficacy.
Right.
So,
and there are no federal standards or any other standards for what it has to include or how it's supposed to perform.
Yeah, NCAP does have some of that, but it's not a standard. It'll give you your crash rating equivalent, but it's not the same thing as a standard. But so you've got variance in the efficacy, and you've got variance in, I guess, consumer adoption or appreciation for it. And as you say, if it becomes an annoyance to you, you're liable to shut it off, and then you lose all of those safety benefits. So there's a real there's a needle that needs to be threaded here, that you have to find the right efficacy and also the right user interface so that the driver is not tempted to turn it off and lose all those safety benefits. So there's a lot that goes into developing these features, and there's still quite a bit of work to do.
Let me get back to your book for a second. I really enjoyed the discussion about metrics, and I know that's something that's close to your heart. But something I noticed about that is that, well, a couple things, actually. First is that you don't talk explicitly about any OEDR metrics. Object event detection and response is the process by which the vehicle sensors detect something, and then it processes the information, and then the vehicle has to respond to that information. So it's fundamental to all these automatic processes that we're talking about, all the way from automatic emergency braking to self-driving. And OEDR is kind of an overall global characteristic, kind of like miles per hour, right? That subsumes everything under it into a handy metric that people can understand. So I wonder if you could talk about that. And the other thing that's related to that is that in the self-driving vehicles, they all seem to rely on artificial intelligence, which includes neural networks and automatic self-learning and all that sort of stuff. Those systems are opaque to human beings. We cannot, as human beings, understand what's inside of those automatic processes. So the only way you can really develop metrics for those, it seems to me, is to look at the statistics of stimulation and response. And frankly, the universe is not going to exist long enough for somebody to get all those meaningful statistical responses from every aspect of a self-driving system, I think. But anyway, your thoughts on that?
So when back in 2020 or so, a research group that I'm with, the Institute of Automated Mobility, came up with a set of metrics for automated vehicle evaluation. So this is the first step in getting to evaluating how the vehicle is performing in different scenarios. And we had some OEMs as part of our research group, and talking to them about what they're open to providing and what they're not. Because of those discussions, we came up with a taxonomy of black, gray, and white box metrics. Black box metrics being metrics that you can measure without having any access to the automated driving system whatsoever. Gray box being, all right, well, we need a little bit of data from the ADS, automated driving system, but not a lot. And the white box being substantial access to the automated driving system. So what you were, and we did that purposefully because we want to make sure that you could, if you are a regulator of some sort or an IOO, infrastructure owner operator, that you can evaluate the driving performance of one of these vehicles without having to have access to the automated driving system. I think we thought that was very important. So that's where that taxonomy came from. Your discussion about the OEDR and its measuring that performance, you're right. Right now, the AI is opaque. It's a black box. So you can't understand or see what's happening on the inside. You can get the input output, and you can measure those things. So we could develop more white box metrics. We have a few in our metrics. And I should mention that the V&V task force is working on SAE J3237. Hopefully that will be published early in the new year. So under the SAE's on-road automated driving committee that has these metrics, black, gray, and white, we have some white box metrics, but we didn't get extensively into them because of that sensitivity from the OEMs. We didn't want to scare them off and not want to work with us. So we were very judicious in having a few white box metrics for which you require ADS data. But we could certainly look at different subsystems. You could have white box metrics that measure the perception. You could have white box metrics that measure the path planning. Both of those subsystems, you could do it, and you could get into them. You could say, you could look at your localization. You could look at your classification. You could look at your tracking, and getting into all of those details. You can probe those aspects of the automated driving system. If you have basically unfettered access to it, but we have stayed away from them for now, Maybe the next revision of J3237 will include some more of those. And maybe the industry will decide that's important and we need to do that. We need to not just look at the vehicle's performance from the system, from the vehicle itself. Did it go through a red light? Is it speeding? Did it avoid that object? Easy to see from you don't even need to be on the vehicle. You could have an infrastructure camera that could capture all of that. But maybe we'll decide, no, we need to now dig deep into the ADS and see why it was doing what we saw at the system or vehicle level.
Since we're on since we're on perception real quick, I was just wondering, I had kind of a question generally, but perception, you have basically four categories of things that the vehicle's doing there. You're detecting the object, you're tracking the object. If it moves, you're getting kind of a depth estimation for it. But then you also have this area called segmentation, where it's basically the vehicle or the computer is classifying objects into appropriate categories. And just looking at those four, to me, and also looking at how that is generally where even in humans we tend to screw up the most, is in how we categorize things in the world and what we believe their attributes are before we act. Is that the most challenging part of the perception?
I mean, there are a few things that are challenging, but that is very true. I mean, if you look at the Uber incident from several years ago, which is actually quite close to my house in Tempe, Arizona, the vehicle misidentified her several times. It was a challenging situation because this is a pedestrian crossing the road perpendicular to the vehicle, and she was walking a bike. And so it misclassified her as a pedestrian, as a cyclist. I think, for some reason, I think at one point maybe even a plastic bag, but it switched back and forth several times from what is this object, and which is, as you say, Michael, very important to know, because you're going to have very different characteristics, both from what speed are you likely to be moving at, but also your ability to change direction quickly. A pedestrian can change direction a lot faster than a car can, and more. You could go off much more obliquely. So yeah, it's a huge challenge that we don't know. I don't work for Waymo, so I don't know how much better they are than Uber was back in 2018. So it's, it probably is one of the biggest challenges they face, but because we don't get data from them, we can't say, okay, they are this good at it now. So maybe to Fred's point, we need some more of those white box metrics so that we understand that. I'm trying to, with the metrics we're doing in J3237, kind of a backdoor way. If you don't perceive things correctly, eventually you're not going to drive appropriately. So if you don't perceive that pedestrian, or you think that pedestrian's a car, you're going to act differently. So we're trying to understand from that perspective, but to really get an understanding of how the vehicle is performing top to bottom, yeah, you need a lot more of those perception path planning metrics.
So when you guys are in these SAE meetings, do you actually get feedback from the OEMs saying, hey, we do want regulations here, we do want guidelines?
Or I've never heard them say that.
Yeah.
We don't get into the politics necessarily or the regulatory scheme, but there are some very good people working from those companies working on the standards with Fred and I. And, they very involved, very engaged, and some of them are excellent collaborators. So, it's not all the companies are doing that. I haven't seen a Tesla representative in any of these standards committees, for example. And I wish they would engage more. I think that they do. I don't know if you saw today's news about the recall of 2 million.
Yeah, right? Insert my shocked face there where you say they haven't been at those meetings.
Yeah.
I wish they would. I think it's be better for them, it'd be better for the industry, it'd be better for the public. But No, Anthony, we don't talk about, at least not on the record, talk about the regulatory schemes.
Well, I didn't think it was more regulatory schemes. More like if I'm the engineer, I want to know, okay, well, what are the guidelines I have to go for? Basically, what you're saying, like, what are the standards I have to hit? Because if not, it's just the Wild West. And one of my concerns go ahead.
As I said, there are no standards you have to hit, right? That's the thing.
Right.
They don't need to, and so until they're forced to. They're not going to. I think that's the crux of it.
Well, that's one of the problems when governments defer to industry consensus standards and industry documents. You've got to remember that the human beings involved in these meetings, myself included, Jeffrey included, and a lot of other people, really do their best to inject their engineering judgment into what these standards are going to cover. But it's also important to note that almost all of these people are paid by their industry sponsors. And, most of them work directly for companies. And even though they are supposed to represent themselves as individuals and not their companies in these meetings, the fact is that it's hard for people to ignore the person who is paying they're giving them a paycheck every couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's interesting because at the IEEE is different than SAE. So SAE, they have these statements they read before every meeting. They say, you're, as Fred said, you're representing yourself, not any other organization. But then some people in their name, they put, say, Jeffrey Wishart, Arizona Commerce Authority, ACA, right? So then it's very clear, like, are you representing yourself? I've just identified myself with this organization. Very different from IEEE, where you are explicitly, in those standards meetings, you're explicitly representing your organization. Your organization has to pay to be a part of that. SAE, as Fred said, we are all individuals, but it's you don't find very frequently someone saying something that their organization wouldn't like. I don't think. I don't think that's gonna. I don't know that, I guess, for sure, but I can't imagine that they are saying things that go against what their company thinks.
No, I think the other extreme is the organization called the AVSC, or what stands for Advanced Vehicle Consortium, which you refer to in your book as an SAE-based consortium. But I always think of them as kind of the, resistance underground from people who want to really defy the government, because they put out these documents as though they're quasi-official documents, yet there's no government organizations involved in it. There are no consumer-oriented organizations involved in it. And to say that they're SAE-based somehow gives them an imprimatur, which I don't think they deserve. I think they're, in a sense, kind of dangerous, because they're putting a pretty face on something that people don't really understand what's underneath the tent here.
Yeah, interesting. I guess I have a better view of them than you do, Fred. The SAE has several different parts to its organization. So it's run by one division of SAE. They're ITC, which I can't remember what that stands for. Technologies Consortium. I can't remember what the I is, but regardless, the process is opaque. Not just anybody can join it. So it's paid companies that are doing it, and they are very careful in their calls, I understand. But they're putting them out as best practices, and I think that's useful. It's kind of like when you guys did your Bill of Rights. I think putting it out to the community for a standards body like SAE, they kind of toss over themselves or over the fence to themselves too, to adopt, to take on and make into a standard, I think is quite useful. So that's one of the things that happened with the metrics work, J32, 37, the IAM. We had our research and we put that out into the public domain. AVSC put theirs out. And what started out as an information report, and SAE has 3 different levels to their documents: information report, recommended practice, and then standard, in increasing amount of industry consensus. So what started out as an information report got upgraded to a recommended practice because the IAM's work and the AVSC's work was kind of philosophically aligned. So I see what the AVSC puts out as useful and helpful to the industry. yes, it's not a standard, it's not a regulation, but I think they put out useful work in my view.
Oh, thank you for that.
So, in your opinion, now, how soon before we have fully autonomous vehicles?
Oh my God, that's a $1
trap.
the $20 billion question, right?
It's a trick question because it happened 2 years ago, according to Elon Musk.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I guess so I live in Arizona and I see Waymos with no vehicles or with no driver.
Have you gotten into them?
Yes, I have.
Oh, what's the experience?
Experience is quite good. I haven't had any issues, although my girlfriend got into one and it went past the road that would have turned to our house and took a circuitous route for some reason. I'm not sure why. But other than that, it's been pretty seamless. Arizona, as you might know, has big, wide streets, and the infrastructure is quite good. It's a block system. It's pretty simple. I know your favorite person, Kyle, used to say that their cruise vehicles in San Francisco would learn 48 times per mile in San Francisco than what they learned in Phoenix. Kind of, you come to Phoenix, it's kind of with the training wheels. It's much easier. We do have traffic, but it's not crazy traffic, and we don't have as many pedestrians or cyclists, these sorts of things, as San Francisco, at least in such a concentrated way. So it's actually the experience was quite good in the Waymo vehicle. I have my thoughts on deployment without the safety standards, but from my experience, it was quite good.
Do you have a concern that the Waymo is trying to take your girlfriend away from you? Oh, you don't want to go to Jeffrey's house? Come on, let's go get a drink.
Bring her back to the depot. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, Anthony. Now I'm going to have nightmares.
Sorry.
But I guess I guess your question, Anthony, but when are we going to see them? We do see them in small numbers. I think that I don't think that we're going to be, I mean, Cruise, their plan was 10 times growth every year until things went awry. I think that we're going to see, I think Waymo is pretty cautious in at least in terms of scaling, or more cautious. So I think that we're going to see them grow their footprint. We may get a couple of other companies, robotaxi companies starting. I mean, I think Motional is, I think, going to probably start to deploy at some point. I don't have any inside information, but I think we'll see some more robotaxi services. I think we'll see some more of the trucking side of things. Some people think that that's a better use case, or at least a simpler use case, because you're on highways, you're at highway speeds, but you don't have the pedestrians and cyclists, and it's not as complicated. It's called the operational design domain. So that may be a better use case. Then you've got your shuttles that are moving at low speed on a university campus or a business campus or an airport. So because they're low speed, the stakes are lower. There are some companies that are doing that, and maybe we'll get there. Or then we've got the Neuros, the grocery delivery companies they could be riding on the sidewalk at very slow speeds. So I think depending on the use case, we'll see them kind of, they'll come in varying degrees and at varying speeds. And I should mention drones. We'll see drones. We'll see automated drones at some point too. So there are lots of different use cases out there, and the timelines are going to be different for each of them, I think.
Great, good to know. Hey, I don't know if you guys have any other questions. If not, I'm going to jump to some of our listener mail. So we only got a couple minutes left. Anyone?
Okay.
Right.
I think that's pretty good.
Okay.
Jeff, thanks so much. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, I feel like we could have gone a lot longer. Maybe we'll have to have you back soon to talk about.
Yeah, happy to.
I wanted to talk about the Smart Drive program and some of the things they're doing in Arizona, like preventing emergency vehicles from hitting at intersections and all that stuff. But
I'd love to talk about that.
We can dive into that another time.
Yes, you definitely have to come back for a part 2. So
sounds good.
Feel free to stick around for the next couple minutes. But hey, listeners, we want to thank Dr. Jeffrey Wishart. With the Arizona Commerce Authority and the Science Foundation of Arizona, and he's a professor at Arizona State University. The book is titled Fundamentals of Connected and Automated Vehicles. It's available from SAE International. So we've got a couple good pieces of listener feedback this week. The number one, and I think, Michael, you really have to address this, is how long have you been funded by Big Auto?
That was a very interesting question that came in response from a flood of people who were not very happy with our comments about the Cybertruck being fairly unsafe. But we've never been funded by Big Auto, and we never will be. That's really one of our founding principles, is independence from any large corporate donors that are going to direct what we do. That's what allows us to say anything we want, and what allows Anthony to make fun of Kyle on a weekly basis.
I've moved on from Kyle. Okay.
But we would accept sponsorship from Piggly Wiggly, wouldn't we?
Oh my God.
We will accept, we will accept donations from anyone that's not, a tier one manufacturer, or, we don't want anyone we don't want anyone basically controlling our operations. We're like most Ralph Nader founded groups, we are hedged towards independence from all the money that's flying around the world these days.
So we've made poor life choices. All right.
Yes.
So Robert writes in, he says, with the Cybertruck's almost unbreakable glass, how are emergency responders going to be able to quickly extricate the vehicle's occupants if they are unresponsive and or the doors are jammed in an accident? That's an excellent question.
That's a great question.
That's one that I don't know if there's really a good answer to yet, because we haven't seen any incidents where emergency responders are having to deal with that sort of thing. I believe, and from what I've been able to gather, very, on the web and from sources that aren't exactly direct law enforcement or life-saving sources, is that the jaws of life can deal with those windows and can deal with the stainless steel, but it will probably be a little more difficult. It may be slower for extractions. But it also points to the need for Tesla to develop better ways for passengers and drivers to exit post crash. I mean, we know that some of their emergency releases on their automatic doors are hidden and in places that make it difficult for someone who hasn't read their owner's manual, which no one does, to be able to extricate themselves from the vehicle in the event of a crash. We know people have gotten trapped in the event of fires and in those situations. And it's something that I think, especially when you're designing a battle tank of a vehicle, that you need to really focus on, is making sure that post-crash safety remains on your radar.
I'd like to point out that I've read my owner's manual, and I've also been picked last in gym class a number of times. Last question from Frank, another Tesla-related question. Hello, I've observed that the current model of Tesla Y's rear tail lights are exceptionally bright, and that Anthony can't speak. Even while driving, the lights are so bright that they look like two red laser beams aimed at the driver behind them. Again, these are not stopping lights, but the regular driving night lights. Is this something you can investigate? Is there a standard around lumens? I don't know.
That's an interesting one. I've never really heard anyone talking about. I mean, we get a lot of feedback, and then there's even a number of groups out there that are strongly suggesting that LED lights and some other things on vehicles today are excessively bright. We're hoping that some of the adaptive headlight rules that are coming down from NHTSA and just the new designs of those are going to mitigate some of that and ensure that headlights are properly aimed. That's also another huge problem, is that headlights move around on vehicles all the time due to vibration, use, collisions, and aren't aligned so that they can properly illuminate the road ahead of you and not blind other drivers. So it's something that we hope gets better with time, but in the case of a rear, dry operating light that's on all the time, I've never heard of that complaint. So I would encourage, if anyone has a similar complaint, don't just let us know, let NHTSA know, because that's what they need to look into. There are standards for the illumination of rear tail lights.
All right, and with that, again, I'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Jeffrey Wishart. The book is called Fundamentals of Connected and Automated Vehicles. Get it now. It's a great Christmas gift. It's a great book. And so thanks, everybody. Till next week.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.